Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we journey into an ancient age of wonder, a time when humanity first learned to make metal, and in doing so, changed the course of civilization forever. This was the Bronze Age. In this world, alchemists discovered a new substance, strong, sharp, and gleaming. Bronze became the backbone of tools and weapons, the shimmer of jewelry and ornament, and the weight of ingots that fueled the first great networks of trade. Cities grew taller, kingdoms reached further, and stories carved in stone were echoed in shining metal. This was an age of warriors in bronze helmets, of artisans casting sacred vessels, of ships heavy with ingots sailing across unknown seas. Yet it was also an age of daily wonders, cooking pots that warmed families, mirrors that gave clearer reflections, and bells that rang in both markets and temples. The Bronze Age gave us the foundations of complex society, the spark of empire, and the beginnings of history itself. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like and subscribe, or simply share a thought in the comments below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is rest. Settle into the quiet, let your mind drift, and allow the past to unfold softly before you as we begin our journey into the wonders and mysteries of the Bronze Age. Let's begin. The earliest bronze artifacts are more ancient than you might think. Long before the rise of Rome, before the pyramids stood in their finished form, people were already working bronze. Some of the earliest known artifacts, small tools, simple blades, and fragments of ornaments, have been dated to over 5,000 years ago. To us, they may appear unremarkable, dull greenish objects corroded by time. But in their day, they represented something almost miraculous. For the first time, humanity had discovered a way to combine two different metals, copper and tin, into a single new substance that was stronger, sharper, and more enduring than either alone. This innovation marked the beginning of an entirely new era. Imagine the first craftsman striking a bronze chisel against wood and realizing it cut more cleanly than stone, or a farmer holding a sickle that lasted through an entire harvest. These early artifacts were the spark that lit the Bronze Age. Bronze technology appeared independently in several regions of the world. One of the marvels of human history is how often different societies, separated by vast distances, arrive at similar discoveries. Bronze was not spread from one single source. Instead, it appeared independently in places as far apart as Mesopotamia, China, and the Indus Valley. In each case, people experimented with the materials available to them, smelting ores in clay furnaces, noticing that copper hardened when mixed with tin or arsenic. This shared invention speaks to something deeply human, the drive to experiment, to test, to find new ways to shape the world. These independent discoveries meant that the Bronze Age did not belong to a single culture or people, but was a step forward for humanity as a whole. Across continents without communication, men and women watched their fires burn hotter, their metals flow, and their tools grow stronger. And in that moment, civilization changed forever. In Mesopotamia, new metal tools transformed farming and allowed greater food surpluses. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, had already been the site of great agricultural innovation. Irrigation canals, fertile soils, and organized labor supported its earliest cities. But farming remained back-breaking work until stronger tools appeared. Bronze plows bit deeper into the earth than wooden or stone implements ever could. Sickles of the new alloy reaped harvests faster, cutting cleanly through stalks of wheat and barley. With these tools, Mesopotamian farmers could cultivate larger fields and gather greater yields. Surpluses followed, and with surplus came freedom. Not every hand was needed in the fields. This allowed some people to become builders, priests, scribes, and soldiers. It was bronze in the hands of farmers that ultimately fed the growth of cities like Uruk and Babylon. In every surplus stored in clay jars, in every loaf of bread baked for a growing population, lay the silent power of the new metal. In China, bronze casting was elevated into an art form unlike anywhere else. While many societies used bronze primarily for tools and weapons, ancient China transformed the alloy into something more, a medium for artistic and spiritual expression. Beginning in the Shang dynasty, metal workers created vast ritual vessels, some weighing hundreds of pounds, cast with extraordinary precision. Unlike hammered metal, these pieces were made using clay molds, into which molten bronze was poured, capturing intricate patterns of dragons, tauti masks, and spirals. These vessels were not just utilitarian objects, they were sacred instruments, used in ceremonies to honor ancestors and gods. Their inscriptions, sometimes naming kings or events, are among the earliest written records of Chinese civilization. To stand before such an artifact today is to feel the weight of both artistry and devotion. The gleaming surfaces once reflected firelight in temples and tombs, connecting the living with the spirits of the past through the timeless medium of bronze. The Indus Valley produced figurines using sophisticated lost wax techniques. In the bustling cities of the Indus Valley, artisans developed a method of casting that remains in use today, the lost wax process. One of the most famous examples is the small yet captivating dancing girl figurine from Mohenjo-daro. Barely taller than a hand, she stands with one hand on her hip, the other stretched outward, her posture confident and full of life. To create her, craftsmen sculpted a model from wax, encased it in clay, and then heated it so the wax melted away, leaving a hollow mold. Into this they poured molten bronze, which captured every detail of the original. The technique reveals not only technical mastery, but also a cultural desire to capture movement, grace, and human expression in enduring form. This tiny figurine whispers across thousands of years, reminding us that the people of the Indus Valley sought beauty and artistry alongside survival and progress. Metalworking spread along trade routes faster than written languages did. Bronze traveled where words had not yet reached. Traders carried copper, tin, and finished goods across deserts, rivers, and seas, passing knowledge along with materials. A villager might study a strange blade brought from afar and learn to copy its shape. A smith might experiment with ores carried on a caravan and stumble upon the same alloy. In this way, metalworking spread like wildfire, even to cultures without writing systems. Long before alphabets or cuneiform linked distant peoples, the gleam of bronze connected them. A sword, a chisel, or a mirror spoke its own universal language: strength, durability, beauty. Archaeological finds show that regions separated by mountains or seas shared common techniques, proof that ideas can travel without words. In its shimmering way, bronze was one of humanity's first great messengers, carrying knowledge faster than the earliest written signs carved into clay or stone. The arrival of bronze often marked the end of the Stone Age in each region. For tens of thousands of years, stone had been humanity's most trusted material. Obsidian blades, flint axes, and grinding stones shaped the lives of countless generations. Yet once bronze appeared, stone began to fade from daily use. The change was not instant. For centuries, both coexisted, with stone still useful and familiar. But bronze tools lasted longer, cut sharper, and could be reforged when damaged. Slowly, traditions of knapping flint or shaping obsidian were abandoned. In some regions, this shift was so profound that archaeologists define entire eras by it, the Stone Age giving way to the Bronze Age. It was not just a technological transition, but a cultural one. Imagine the last craftsman teaching his son to strike flakes from a stone core, even as a neighbor's child learned to pour molten bronze. One age was ending, another beginning, and the future belonged to fire and metal. The transition to metal did not happen all at once, but varied widely by geography. When we call it the Bronze Age, it is easy to imagine a single moment sweeping across the world. In truth, the shift to bronze unfolded unevenly. In some regions, such as Mesopotamia and Egypt, the alloy spread quickly through bustling trade networks. In others, isolated or less resource-rich, stone remained dominant for centuries longer. Even neighboring communities might stand in different ages, one with fields harvested by bronze sickles, another with flint blades. Climate, access to tin, and local traditions all shaped the pace of change. This patchwork makes the Bronze Age less a single global event, and more a mosaic of overlapping timelines. Some societies even skipped bronze almost entirely, moving from stone straight to iron. The story of this age is not a uniform march forward, but a complex web of discoveries, exchanges, and adaptations that unfolded in different ways across the ancient world. The copper-tin alloy was harder than copper and could hold sharper edges for longer. Copper had been humanity's first metal, but on its own, it was soft and prone to bending. When mixed with tin, however, it became something entirely new. Bronze could hold a sharp edge through repeated use, making knives, axes, and chisels far more reliable. The science behind this alloying was unknown to its discoverers, but the difference was unmistakable. A tool that once dulled after a few strokes now cut cleanly again and again. For farmers, that meant more efficient harvests. For builders, sturdier construction. For soldiers, a weapon that did not fail in the heat of battle. This durability gave the alloy an almost magical reputation. People may not have understood crystal structures or metallurgy, but they saw proof in their hands. This new substance was stronger than what came before, a material born of earth and fire that reshaped the possibilities of daily life. Swords of bronze were a leap forward from flint or obsidian blades. Before bronze, blades had always been fragile. Flint chipped easily, obsidian sliced sharply but shattered under strain, and copper bent at the first hard strike. The arrival of bronze swords changed the rules. Short and sturdy, often double-edged, they could slash, thrust, and parry without breaking. To a warrior of the age, such a weapon was more than a tool of combat. It was a symbol of power and prestige. The gleam of a sword in the sun carried both psychological weight and practical advantage. Armies armed with bronze swords could dominate neighbors still using stone. Myths of shining blades, carried by gods and heroes, may echo this awe. For the first time in history, human hands held a weapon designed not only for survival, but for organized battle, a leap that transformed warfare and etched bronze swords into the heart of ancient legend. Axes of bronze could fell trees that stone tools struggled with. For much of human history, tearing land was slow, exhausting work. Stone axes could cut, but their edges dulled quickly, often breaking after repeated strikes. With bronze, the balance shifted. Axes forged from the new alloy could withstand blow after blow, their edges biting deep into wood that would have resisted stone. Whole forests that had once seemed immovable could now be cleared for farmland, pastures, or building material. This transformation was not only practical, but also symbolic. Settlements expanded into areas that had been too laborious to tame before. Strong beams supported sturdier homes. and larger ships became possible thanks to the reliable felling of massive trees. A single tool, sharpened and gleaming, gave humanity the ability to reshape landscapes on a new scale. The sound of bronze striking wood echoed across valleys and plains, marking the beginning of forests giving way to the growth of civilization. Chariots became possible only once strong bronze fittings could be forged. The chariot is one of the enduring symbols of the ancient world, swift, elegant, and deadly. But it could not exist without the strength of bronze. The wheels, axles, and harnesses placed immense stress on wood alone, which would splinter under strain. By casting bronze fittings, linchpins, and reinforcements, ancient craftsmen created vehicles that could withstand speed, vibration, and the pull of horses. Once perfected, chariots transformed battlefields. Commanders could race across the fighting ground, directing troops or striking at enemies with precision. They also became symbols of wealth and authority, used in ceremonies, and even buried with rulers to carry them into the afterlife. Beyond war, the chariot was a marvel of engineering, a synthesis of wood, leather, and bronze that embodied the ingenuity of its age. Without those crucial metal parts, the chariot would have remained only an idea. With them, it became a force of history. Armor of bronze provided better protection, yet remained lighter than bone defenses. Before bronze, warriors had little choice but to rely on hide, wood, or bone for protection. These materials offered some defense, but they were bulky, fragile, and often ineffective against sharp blades. The introduction of bronze armor changed everything. Helmets hammered from sheets of metal curved smoothly to fit the head, deflecting blows that would have been fatal. Breastplates shielded vital organs, while greaves protected legs. What made this armor remarkable was not just its strength, but its balance. Though heavier than leather, it was still lighter and far more reliable than bone or stone defenses. Warriors clad in bronze gleamed beneath the sun, their armor ringing with the sound of impact, inspiring both awe and fear. Such protection was expensive, reserved for elites and champions, but it gave them undeniable advantages in combat. Bronze armor was more than protection, it was a shining declaration of status and power. Spears tipped with bronze transformed hunting and warfare. The spear was one of humanity's oldest weapons, used long before the discovery of metal. Yet when tipped with bronze, it became something altogether different. The alloy held its edge through repeated strikes, penetrated deeper into flesh or hide, and could be reshaped if bent. For hunters, this meant more reliable kills, turning uncertain hunts into dependable sources of food. For soldiers, it created formations of deadly efficiency. Lines of warriors could present walls of gleaming spear points, advancing together like a living barrier. The sight alone must have been terrifying, hundreds of bronze tips catching the light, ready to strike. Spears were also versatile, thrown as projectiles or wielded in close combat. They became the backbone of armies across the Bronze Age world. Stronger than wood, sharper than stone, the spear tipped with bronze embodied both continuity with the past and the dawn of something new in human conflict. Curved bronze sickles made harvesting grain vastly more efficient. For early farmers, the harvest was the most crucial time of year, but it was also the most demanding. Flint sickles dulled quickly, forcing constant resharpening and slowing the work. Bronze sickles solved this problem. Their curved edges stayed sharp through long hours of cutting, and when they did wear down, they could be reforged rather than discarded. This meant larger fields could be harvested more quickly, producing more grain to feed growing populations. With surpluses came stability. Villages expanded into towns, and resources could be diverted to building, trade, and art. The bronze sickle became a symbol of prosperity. its gleam catching the sun as it swept through golden fields. It was not merely a tool, but a foundation for urban growth, cultural development, and even empire. In the hands of farmers, the sickle was as transformative as any sword in the hands of a warrior. Bronze fishhooks improved diets by expanding access to aquatic food. Fishing had always been an uncertain pursuit, with bone or stone hooks prone to snapping under strain. Bronze hooks changed that. Small, strong, and sharp, they could be forged in shapes tailored to different fish, giving fishermen new versatility. Lakes, rivers, and seas became more reliable sources of food, supplementing grain harvests with fresh protein. Communities near coasts and waterways flourished, not only feeding themselves but trading dried or salted fish with inland neighbors. The humble hook may seem insignificant compared to swords or chariots, yet it quietly reshaped diets and survival. Families who once relied heavily on crops could now depend on steady catches, reducing the risk of famine in poor harvest years. The gleam of a bronze hook pulling a fish from water represents one of the quiet revolutions of the age, a small tool that nourished civilizations and gave new meaning to the bounty of rivers and seas. Slender bronze needles allowed finer and stronger textiles to be produced. Before bronze, sewing needles were often carved from bone or wood. They were thick, easily broken, and limited the fineness of stitches. Bronze needles changed clothing forever. Strong and slender, they could pierce cloth cleanly, allowing for tighter seams, more durable garments, and intricate designs. This meant communities could make clothes not only warmer and more practical, but also more decorative. Patterns could be stitched with precision, and fabrics could be reinforced against wear. Such improvements affected every layer of society. Farmers in the fields had sturdier clothes, while nobles could display wealth through embroidered finery. The ability to produce stronger textiles also encouraged trade, as fabric became a valuable commodity. A single bronze needle, carefully forged, might last a lifetime, passed down through generations. It may not have looked as impressive as a sword, but its quiet influence shaped daily comfort, survival, and identity in profound ways. Polished bronze mirrors gave people their first clear self-reflections. For much of history, the only mirror available was still water or polished stone, offering only faint, distorted reflections. Bronze changed that. When carefully polished, it gleamed with enough clarity to show a person's face in detail. This was more than vanity. It altered how people saw themselves and how they presented their identity. Grooming, adornment, and fashion took on new importance when individuals could see their own image. In temples and rituals, mirrors held spiritual meaning, reflecting not just human faces, but also firelight and offerings. They became symbols of the sun, of clarity, and of divine connection. For nobles, they were luxuries; for priests, sacred tools. To look into a bronze mirror thousands of years ago was to encounter oneself in a way no generation before had known. It was a moment of intimacy between human and reflection, between the physical and the spiritual. Bronze required tin, a rare resource compared to copper. Copper was found in many parts of the ancient world, but tin was elusive. Without tin, bronze could not exist, and so the search for it became one of the driving forces of the age. Deposits were scattered, often in remote or mountainous regions. Communities that controlled tin mines found themselves in possession of immense power, able to supply the material that every kingdom craved. The scarcity of tin also gave it great value, sometimes rivaling that of gold. Entire trade networks stretched across continents to bring it to workshops and forges. Wars were fought for its control, alliances forged to secure its flow. Every sword, every chisel, Every vessel of bronze depended on this one rare ingredient. The search for tin bound together distant peoples, making it one of the most important and mysterious resources of the ancient world. Vast trade networks arose just to supply tin to civilizations. The hunger for tin drew lines of connection across the ancient world. Caravans carried it over deserts, riverboats ferried it downstream, and ships braved seas to deliver it to waiting forges. These networks stretched astonishing distances, linking regions that otherwise had little contact. Alongside tin, ideas, stories, and cultures traveled too. Archaeologists find evidence of goods from distant lands lying side by side in Bronze Age sites, proof of far-reaching exchange. The need for tin created some of humanity's first great economic systems, fragile but ambitious. The networks were so vital that when they faltered, entire civilizations were weakened. To imagine the Bronze Age is to imagine endless roads and rivers filled with traders, each carrying a piece of the puzzle. Without tin, no bronze; without bronze, no kingdoms. Tin was not just a resource, but the thread that stitched the age together. Some tin may have come from as far away as the British Isles. Among the most intriguing mysteries of the Bronze Age is how far tin traveled. Archaeological evidence suggests that some of the tin used in the Mediterranean may have come from the distant hills of Cornwall in Britain. Imagine the journey, mined in a windswept landscape at the edge of the known world, carried to the coast, shipped across rough seas, then traded from one community to another until it reached cities like Mycenae or Ugarit. To hold a bronze dagger in Greece or a vessel in Egypt may have been to hold a piece of Britain, carried thousands of miles. This possibility reveals how astonishingly connected the ancient world was. Even in an age without compasses, maps, or engines, humans found ways to move precious cargo across vast distances. The story of tin from the British Isles shows how global the Bronze Age truly was. Bronze itself became a form of wealth and trade. Though copper and tin were valuable, the finished alloy was often treated as wealth in its own right. Ingots of bronze, sometimes shaped like ox hides or simple bars, served as currency before coins existed. These ingots could be stacked in storehouses, weighed in markets, and exchanged across borders. In some places, bronze objects were made specifically for trade, never meant for practical use, but as portable stores of value. A chisel might be melted down, a sword reforged, a vessel recast. The metal itself mattered more than its shape. In this way, bronze functioned both as a tool of survival and as a currency of prosperity. To hold bronze was to hold power, whether in the form of ingots, ornaments, or weapons. In the bustling markets of the Bronze Age, the ringing sound of metal on scales was the sound of wealth itself. Control of tin mines was as important as control of gold centuries later. In later history, kings fought wars over gold and silver. In the Bronze Age, tin was the true prize. Whoever controlled the mines controlled the production of the alloy that armed warriors, fed farmers, and enriched traders. Rival kingdoms sent armies to secure deposits or to intercept shipments along trade routes. Strategic passes and mountain valleys became sites of power because they hid tin beneath their soil. Some historians suggest that entire wars, remembered vaguely in myth, may have been sparked by this struggle. To deny a rival tin was to weaken their armies, their farms, and their economy. Tin was the oil of the Bronze Age, the essential resource that fueled everything else. Control of it meant dominance. The lack of it meant vulnerability. The glow of bronze weapons and tools was only possible because someone, somewhere, commanded the hidden seams of tin in the earth. Ships were built to transport heavy ingots of copper and tin. Over the waters of the ancient world, ships carried the lifeblood of the Bronze Age. Unlike pottery or grain, metal was brutally heavy. Yet it was so valuable that entire ships were constructed to carry loads of copper and tin ingots across seas. Their hulls had to be strong, their joints sealed tight, their crews skilled enough to manage the weight. These journeys were dangerous. Storms could sink a vessel in moments, pirates could seize the cargo, and even a small leak could spell disaster. Still, the profits were worth the risk. Shipwrecks found on the seafloor, laden with ingots, revealed just how extensive this trade was. Each ship was more than transport. It was a link in a vast chain, delivering the raw materials that kept the forges burning. Without these daring voyages, the Bronze Age economy could not have functioned at the scale it did. The Uluburun shipwreck carried bronze trade goods across the Mediterranean. One of the most extraordinary archaeological finds of the 20th century lies beneath the sea off the coast of modern Turkey. The Uluburun shipwreck, over 3,000 years old, carried a cargo that perfectly captures the spirit of the Bronze Age. Its hold contained copper and tin ingots, enough to make tons of bronze, alongside treasures from across the known world. Glass beads from Mesopotamia, ivory from Africa, and jewelry from the Near East. This single ship was a microcosm of the interconnected world of its time, proof that cultures exchanged not only goods, but ideas and artistry. The ship likely sank during a storm, its cargo lost to the depths. Yet in that loss, it left us a preserved snapshot of Bronze Age trade. The Uluburun wreck tells us that even then, the world was global, bound together by networks of exchange and the gleam of metal. Weighing systems emerged to standardize the exchange of metals. Trade in bronze demanded fairness, and fairness demanded measurement. Across the Bronze Age world, merchants developed weights and scales to ensure that exchanges were just. Tiny weights shaped like animals or simple geometric forms have been uncovered, each precisely crafted to represent consistent units. Traders carried them in pouches, setting them on balance scales to measure ingots, scrap metal, or finished tools. This practice represented more than commerce. It was mathematics in action, abstract thought brought into daily life. To weigh metal was to give it meaning, to fix its value in a way that everyone could agree upon. Over time, these systems were codified into law, regulated by rulers who knew that order in trade meant stability in society. In the quiet act of weighing bronze on a scale, humanity took one of its first steps toward economic fairness and the foundations of standardized currency. Trade in bronze linked cultures that never met face to face. Imagine a farmer in Mesopotamia cutting grain with a bronze sickle, unaware that the tin within it might have come from mountains thousands of miles away. Or a warrior in Greece raising a bronze sword forged from copper mined in Cyprus. These objects carried stories of lands and peoples the owners would never see. Traders and caravans connected them all, passing goods hand to hand across vast networks. In this way, bronze became a bridge, linking cultures into a shared system of exchange. Even if two civilizations never spoke or fought, they were bound by the same materials, the same technologies, the same hunger for the alloy. Bronze created invisible ties, making the world smaller and more interconnected. To hold a bronze object was to hold the result of countless journeys, exchanges, and relationships stretching far beyond the horizon of one's own village or city. The Bronze Age saw some of the first truly globalized economies. When people think of globalization, they often imagine modern trade routes, shipping containers, and worldwide networks. Yet the essence of it began in the Bronze Age. The need for copper, tin, and the alloy they produced tied distant regions together. A mine in Central Europe might supply raw material for weapons in Greece. A ship sailing from Cyprus might carry cargo that ended up in Mesopotamia. Alongside metals came textiles, ceramics, ivory, and ideas. The economy of the Bronze Age was fragile, dependent on long-distance links, but it was also astonishingly complex. When these networks thrived, civilizations flourished. When they faltered, collapse followed. For the first time, humanity lived in a world where no culture truly stood alone. The Bronze Age economy was not global in the modern sense, but it was the first time human societies were bound so tightly by trade across continents. Stronger tools allowed farming surpluses that supported larger cities. The story of civilization is, in many ways, the story of food. Stone tools had made farming possible, but their limits kept most communities small. With bronze tools, fields could be expanded, harvests gathered more quickly, and food stored in greater quantities. Surpluses changed everything. They meant that not everyone had to work the land. Some could become builders, potters, scribes, or soldiers. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities, each supported by overflowing granaries. This abundance also fueled population growth, leading to denser settlements and more ambitious building projects. The link is clear. Without stronger tools, no surpluses. Without surpluses, no great cities. The shining blades that cut grain in the fields were, indirectly, the same forces that raised the first palaces and temples. Bronze gave humanity more than food. It gave the foundation for complex societies and the urban life that followed. The first true kingdoms rose during the Bronze Age. With food surpluses secured, trade networks humming, and armies armed with bronze weapons, power began to concentrate in new ways. Small tribes and villages gave way to larger political structures. The first kingdoms. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond, rulers claimed authority over wide territories, collecting taxes, building monuments, and organizing armies. These kingdoms represented a shift from community leadership to centralized states, with rulers who were not only political leaders, but also seen as divine or semi-divine figures. Bronze both symbolized and enforced their rule. Crowns, thrones, and treasures glittered with it, while armies marched in disciplined ranks with bronze swords and spears. The Age of Kings was born in the fire of bronze forges, setting the stage for empires to come. These early kingdoms were the ancestors of modern states, and their rise remains one of the most profound legacies of the Bronze Age. Hierarchies hardened, with warriors and elites at the top. The Bronze Age was not only about tools and weapons, it reshaped society itself. In earlier times, communities were often more egalitarian, with survival shared among all. But once bronze entered the picture, power began to concentrate. Those who controlled access to the alloy, whether through trade, wealth, or warfare, rose above others. Warriors with bronze weapons commanded respect and fear, while elites displayed ornaments and treasures that marked their elevated status. Palaces and citadels reflected this shift, with rulers living apart from common farmers and artisans. Hierarchies hardened into classes, and inequality became more deeply rooted. Bronze created new opportunities, but it also created new divisions. To live in the Bronze Age was to see the glitter of metal, not only in tools and jewelry, but in the structure of society itself, a gleam that separated rulers from ruled, rich from poor, powerful from powerless. Bronze treasures were buried with rulers to show status in death. Archaeologists have uncovered tombs filled with bronze treasures, swords, cups, figurines, and ornaments, all placed carefully beside the dead. These objects were not practical in the afterlife, but symbolic, showing the wealth and power of the one entombed. In some cases, entire hoards of bronze were buried, not hidden for safekeeping, but deliberately taken out of circulation to honor the dead. Such burials tell us that bronze was not only useful, but deeply tied to ideas of identity, memory, and eternity. To bury bronze was to proclaim, "This person mattered, and their status will endure beyond death." For the living, the glittering displays reinforced hierarchy, reminding communities of the greatness of their leaders. In life and death alike, bronze defined power. Each burial was both a farewell and a spectacle, where the gleam of metal shone as brightly in tombs as it did in palaces. The earliest palaces were filled with bronze ornamentation. Step into the great halls of the Bronze Age, and you would find more than stone and timber. Palaces glimmered with bronze ornamentation, door handles, fittings, decorative plaques, and ritual vessels. The alloy was used not only for tools and weapons, but as a mark of refinement, transforming architecture into a stage for wealth and prestige. In places like Knossos on Crete or Mycenae in Greece, bronze details adorned thrones, ceremonial chambers, and storerooms, reinforcing the image of rulers as figures of extraordinary power. The use of metal in architecture also spoke to the growing skill of craftsmen, who could now shape the alloy into delicate patterns or durable fixtures. These palaces were not merely homes, they were symbols of authority, and bronze was part of their language of power. Each ornament gleamed with meaning, reflecting firelight and reminding subjects of the grandeur of their leaders. Metal idols and offerings played central roles in religious life. Religion and metalcraft were deeply entwined during the Bronze Age. Across cultures, bronze was shaped into idols, amulets, and offerings dedicated to gods and ancestors. These objects were often small, figurines of animals, miniature weapons, or simple shapes, yet their significance was immense. Cast in fire and gleaming in temples, they carried spiritual weight, believed to hold divine essence or channel prayers. Some were placed in rivers and lakes as gifts to unseen forces, their shine disappearing into dark waters. Others were left at shrines, accumulating into great hoards of devotion. Unlike perishable offerings of food or flowers, bronze endured, linking the living to the eternal. In their permanence, these idols symbolized faith itself, lasting long after their makers had passed. For believers, bronze was not just a material, but a sacred medium, forged by fire, blessed by ritual, and entrusted to the care of the gods. Priests in some societies controlled the distribution of bronze. In many regions, bronze was too valuable to be left in common hands. Control often rested with priests, who acted as both spiritual leaders and managers of resources. They oversaw the casting of ritual items, distributed tools, and ensured that temples held reserves of bronze ingots. By tying access to the alloy with religion, they reinforced their authority. Bronze was not just metal, but sacred, and its use sanctioned by the divine. This dual control gave priests extraordinary power. They could decide who received a tool, who bore a weapon, who offered a gift to the gods. Archaeological evidence of temples doubling as workshops and storehouses confirms this overlap of faith and economy. In such societies, bronze was more than a material. It was a pathway to both earthly power and spiritual connection, guarded and guided by those who claimed to speak for the gods. Feasts featured drinking vessels cast from the shining alloy. The Bronze Age was not only about survival and conflict, it was also about celebration. Feasts played a vital role in binding communities together, and bronze drinking vessels became central symbols of these events. Goblets, cups, and bowls were cast with care, often decorated with intricate designs. To drink from such a vessel was to share in prestige and ritual. At banquets, Rulers and elites displayed their wealth by offering guests wine or ale in gleaming cups, the firelight reflecting from polished surfaces. These vessels were not only practical but ceremonial, connecting the act of drinking with ideas of power, abundance, and even the divine. Archaeologists have found hordes of such vessels buried in tombs, suggesting they were as valued in death as in life. Each cup was more than a container. It was a statement, a shining piece of artistry that transformed feasting into ritual. Masks of bronze were created for rituals and burials. Among the most haunting discoveries of the Bronze Age are masks made from thin sheets of bronze. These masks, carefully crafted to resemble human faces, were placed over the dead in burial rites or worn in ceremonies. Their purpose was spiritual as much as symbolic. By covering a face, a mask could transform an ordinary person into an ancestor, a spirit, or even a god. In burials, the mask preserved the visage of the deceased, allowing them to be remembered in metal long after flesh had faded. In rituals, they allowed priests or participants to embody forces larger than themselves. The gleam of bronze, polished to reflect firelight, would have given these masks an otherworldly presence, halfway between human and divine. To look upon one today is to glimpse an ancient belief in transformation, in the power of metal to bridge life, death, and the supernatural. Craftsmanship in bronze carried spiritual significance. To cast bronze was not only an act of skill, but often an act of reverence. Many cultures saw the process itself as sacred, fire transforming raw earth into shining metal. Smiths were sometimes viewed with awe, even suspicion, believed to possess secret knowledge granted by the gods. The act of forging could be seen as a ritual, a miniature echo of creation itself. Finished objects carried this spiritual weight. A dagger, a figurine, or a vessel was more than material. It was born of fire, shaped by human will and imbued with divine essence. This belief gave bronze artifacts a power beyond their physical use. They could serve as talismans, sacred gifts, or symbols of cosmic order. In the workshop and the temple alike, the glow of molten bronze was more than practical. It was mystical, a reminder that human hands could channel the forces of nature into sacred form. The Bronze Age saw the rise of massive stone fortresses. While bronze weapons and tools empowered individuals, they also inspired communities to build larger defenses. Across Europe, the Near East, and beyond, massive stone fortresses rose during the Bronze Age. Their walls, sometimes many meters thick, enclosed entire settlements, protecting inhabitants from raids and rival kingdoms. Bronze weapons made warfare more deadly, and so people sought safety behind stone. These fortresses were not only military strongholds, but also centers of power, where rulers lived and treasures were stored. Towers, gates, and battlements testified to both practical defense and symbolic authority. To live within such walls was to belong to a community defined by strength, while outsiders looked upon them with awe or envy. The partnership of bronze and stone reshaped the landscape, shining weapons for attack, immovable fortresses for defense. Together, they defined an age of both vulnerability and resilience in human history. The walls of Troy were built during this era. The city of Troy, immortalized in Homer's epics, was a Bronze Age stronghold. Its legendary walls, said to have been built with the help of gods, were in reality the product of human labor and Bronze Age engineering. Archaeological excavations reveal layers of fortifications, rebuilt and reinforced across centuries. These walls were immense, constructed from stone but supported by tools forged in bronze. They protected the city from enemies and served as a visible symbol of its wealth and power. In myth, Warriors like Achilles and Hector fought at these walls, but even in history, they stood as a testament to Troy's importance in the trade networks of the Eastern Mediterranean. To imagine the Bronze Age is to imagine ships docking at Troy's harbors, merchants and warriors moving through its gates, and the mighty walls looming over them, born of stone and shaped by the tools of bronze. Mycenaean citadels were defended with bronze weapons. In the hills of Greece, the Mycenaean civilization rose during the height of the Bronze Age. Their citadels, such as Mycenae and Terens, were walled with massive blocks of stone, but their true strength lay in the warriors who defended them. Armed with bronze swords, spears, and daggers, these soldiers stood at the heart of Greek power. Excavations of shaft graves and tombs have revealed glittering hoards of weapons buried alongside rulers, testifying to their importance. The Mycenaeans were among the first to adopt large-scale chariot warfare, using bronze fittings to bind wheels and harnesses, allowing them to field mobile forces on the battlefield. The gleam of bronze weapons, polished to brilliance, was both practical and symbolic, a mark of prestige and dominance. Behind the walls of their citadels, the Mycenaeans guarded their treasures and their power, their weapons as much symbols of rule as tools of war. Bronze tools allowed smoother stone carving for temples. The grand temples of the ancient world were not only feats of engineering, but also of artistry. Stone, however, is unforgiving, and before metal tools, carving it was laborious and imprecise. Bronze chisels and hammers changed that. With sharper edges and greater durability, artisans could cut into limestone and sandstone with newfound control. Smooth surfaces replaced rough-hewn blocks, and decorative patterns became possible. Temples could now be adorned with detailed reliefs, inscriptions, and architectural flourishes that reflected both skill and devotion. This transformation was not just aesthetic, it was spiritual. Temples became canvases for sacred imagery, sanctuaries that gleamed with meaning as much as with stone. The introduction of bronze tools allowed humanity to shape its monuments in ways never before possible, leaving behind structures that continue to inspire awe. Each stroke of bronze against stone was a step closer to the heavens. Stonehenge's later phases overlapped with metal technology. Stonehenge, the great circle of standing stones on the Salisbury Plain, began long before bronze. Its earliest phases were built in the Neolithic, with wooden posts and massive stones raised by communities who knew only stone tools. But its story stretches into the Bronze Age. By the time its later bluestones were arranged and burial mounds dotted the landscape around it, bronze tools and ornaments were spreading across Britain. Archaeologists have found bronze daggers and axes buried in the nearby barrows, linking the monument with the new era. The people who gathered at Stonehenge may have worn bronze jewelry, carried bronze weapons, and performed rituals that reflected the age's changing beliefs. In this way, the monument straddles two worlds, a Neolithic past of stone and an emerging Bronze Age of metal. Stonehenge reminds us that ages do not end suddenly, but overlap, blending old traditions with new discoveries. Bronze chisels enabled finer artistry in Egypt's pyramids. The pyramids of Egypt were conceived in the age of stone but refined in the age of bronze. While the Great Pyramids of Giza were built earlier, later tombs and temples benefited from the precision of bronze chisels. These tools allowed craftsmen to carve hieroglyphs more cleanly into walls, to shape statues with greater detail, and to finish surfaces with remarkable smoothness. The artistry of Egypt's New Kingdom, with its delicate inscriptions and richly decorated tombs, owes much to the advantages of bronze. Scenes of gods, pharaohs, and daily life were etched into stone in lines that endure to this day. Without bronze, such refinement would have been difficult, if not impossible. The chisel, seemingly humble, became the bridge between human imagination and the permanence of stone. In every line carved in a tomb wall, the glow of bronze is present, carrying stories across thousands of years. Nails of the alloy held together some of the earliest wooden structures. Before bronze, builders had to rely on wooden pegs, ropes, or simple joinery to hold their structures together. These methods worked but limited what could be built. The introduction of bronze nails changed the possibilities of architecture. Strong, durable, and resistant to decay, they fastened planks and beams securely, allowing for larger, more complex wooden structures. Boats could be reinforced, doors strengthened, and furniture made steadier. Though small compared to swords or chariots, these nails were revolutionary. They represent the quiet power of technology, not dramatic, not ceremonial, but essential. Each nail driven into wood was a statement of permanence, a way of holding the world together. Archaeologists have found bronze nails in shipwrecks, in ancient homes, and even in great doors of temples. They are reminders that sometimes history is shaped not by grand monuments, but by the smallest of tools, made possible by bronze. Bronze fittings secured the great doors of temples. In temples across the Bronze Age world, the doors themselves were monuments. Towering wooden panels, heavy and imposing, needed strength to endure centuries of use. Bronze provided that strength. Hinges, handles, and decorative fittings of the alloy reinforced doors and made them functional as well as beautiful. These fittings gleamed in the sun or firelight, signaling both wealth and sanctity. To pass through such doors was to enter a space where the divine and human met, where the strength of bronze held open the path to worship. The fittings also served a symbolic purpose, embodying endurance and protection. Even when the wood rotted away, the bronze remained, unearthed millennia later by archaeologists. Each hinge and handle is a testament to how the alloy was woven into daily and spiritual life alike, not only in tools and weapons, but in the very thresholds of sacred spaces. Statues cast in bronze were erected to honor gods and heroes. Bronze casting gave rise to some of the first lifelike statues in human history. Unlike stone, which could chip or crack, bronze could capture fine details of muscle, expression, and movement. Across temples and public spaces, statues of gods, ancestors, and heroes stood gleaming in the sun. They were offerings of devotion, monuments of power, and works of art that seemed almost alive. Some were colossal, towering over worshippers, while others were small, portable idols carried in processions. Each represented a blending of technical mastery and spiritual purpose. Bronze durability ensured that many survived centuries, though countless others were melted down and recast, their original forms lost to time. To imagine the Bronze Age is to imagine cities and temples adorned with statues that glowed with sacred presence, embodying both human creativity and divine reverence in figures cast from fire and metal. Shrines across Europe and Asia glittered with bronze ornaments. From the Aegean to the Indus Valley, shrines and sacred spaces were decorated with ornaments of bronze. Small figurines, plaques, and ritual vessels were placed on altars or hung on walls, their polished surfaces catching candlelight and firelight. These ornaments were offerings, but also symbols of prosperity. They told worshippers that the community was strong enough to dedicate valuable metal to the gods. The universality of this practice is striking. Whether in Greece, Mesopotamia, or India, sacred places often glittered with bronze. The objects themselves varied: a bull here, a bird there, a simple cup or a detailed idol, but all carried meaning. For believers, these ornaments bridged the human and the divine. For archaeologists, they reveal how spiritual life and material wealth were intertwined. The sparkle of bronze in shrines was more than decoration. It was an eternal gesture of faith and gratitude. Cooking pots of bronze heated more evenly compared to clay. Clay pots had served humanity for millennia, but they had limitations. They cracked easily under direct heat and distributed warmth unevenly. Bronze pots transformed cooking. They could sit directly over a fire, heating evenly and lasting far longer than clay. Meals became easier to prepare and more consistent, supporting larger households and gatherings. These pots also symbolized status, as not everyone could afford such a luxury. To eat from food cooked in bronze was to share in prosperity. Beyond their practical use, they also carried symbolic weight, used in feasts and offerings to gods. Archaeological finds of soot-blackened bronze pots remind us that not all bronze gleamed in temples or on battlefields. Much of it lived in kitchens, shaping daily nourishment. The invention of bronze cooking pots was as revolutionary for the home as swords were for the battlefield, sustaining both body and culture. Razors of bronze were used in grooming rituals. Personal care in the Bronze Age was not neglected, and razors of bronze played an important role. Unlike sharp flint, which could be dangerous and inconsistent, bronze razors offered smooth, reliable edges for shaving hair. Grooming was more than vanity in many cultures. It carried spiritual meaning. Priests in Egypt, for example, shaved their bodies to remain ritually pure, and bronze razors made this possible. For others, shaving or trimming marked status, adulthood, or identity within a group. Razors found in graves suggest they were prized possessions, tools of both daily life and symbolic importance. Their presence shows us that the Bronze Age was not only about farming, warfare, and religion, but also about the personal rituals that defined how people lived and saw themselves. A simple bronze razor, carefully forged and sharpened, gave people control over their appearance and, in some sense, over their identity. Bronze tweezers show attention to personal care. It is easy to think of the Bronze Age only in terms of weapons, tools, and monuments. Yet even small details of life reveal how people valued comfort and appearance. Among the surprising artifacts archaeologists have uncovered are bronze tweezers. Their simple design, two thin arms bent to form a grip, has barely changed across thousands of years. These tweezers suggest that grooming mattered, even in an age when survival was far from guaranteed. They may have been used to pluck hairs, tend wounds, or remove splinters. Some were plain, others decorated, indicating that even such a modest object could be a possession of pride. Their presence in graves shows they were considered important enough to accompany people into death. The existence of bronze tweezers tells us that humanity's concern with personal presentation and with the small comforts of cleanliness stretches back deep into antiquity. Jewelry of bronze became widespread among common people. Jewelry was no longer the preserve of elites once bronze entered the picture. Gold and silver remained rare, but bronze could be shaped into bracelets, rings, necklaces, and pins at a fraction of the cost. This made adornment accessible to ordinary people. Farmers, artisans, and traders could decorate themselves with gleaming ornaments that marked status, identity, or even affection. Some jewelry was simple, like coiled rings or plain bangles. Others were decorated with patterns, spirals, or animal motifs. Bronze jewelry was also practical. Pins secured clothing, while amulets carried protective symbolism. The spread of such ornaments reveals how bronze touched every level of society. It did not only serve warriors or rulers, it also brought beauty to daily life. In graves, humble people were buried with bronze jewelry, proof that even those without palaces or armies wanted to carry the gleam of the metal into eternity. Bells of bronze marked time and ritual moments. Sound was as much a part of the Bronze Age as sight. Bells cast from bronze created clear, resonant tones that carried across spaces. They were used to mark sacred rituals, to call communities together, or to keep time during ceremonies. The shimmering ring of a bronze bell had a magical quality, blending durability with music. In some cultures, bells were believed to ward off spirits, their sound a protective charm. In others, they marked the rhythms of life, signaling the start of feasts, prayers, or even labor. The fact that bells appear across many regions shows their universal appeal. Unlike weapons or tools, their purpose was not survival but connection, to gods, to communities, to the unseen. Each strike of a bronze bell was a moment of focus, pulling attention into the present, just as its echoes carried far into the air. Bronze musical instruments produced tones never heard before. The Bronze Age brought not only new materials, but also new music. Metal horns, cymbals, and gongs joined the world of sound, expanding what communities could create. Unlike wood or bone instruments, bronze could produce louder, more resonant, and more varied tones. Horns carried across valleys, used both in rituals and in warfare. Cymbals clashed in ceremonies, their bright sounds cutting through chants and drums. Gongs produced deep vibrations that must have felt as much as heard, resonating in both body and spirit. These instruments gave voice to bronze itself, turning fire-forged metal into music. For participants, the sound would have been transformative, perhaps even otherworldly, unlike anything they had known before. The presence of these instruments reminds us that bronze was not only practical but expressive, shaping culture and emotion through the universal language of music. It gave humanity new ways to celebrate, mourn, and worship. Bronze clasps secured clothing more reliably than bone pins. Before bronze, clothing was fastened with bone or wooden pins, which often snapped or worked loose. Bronze clasps solved this everyday problem. They were stronger, longer lasting, and could be made in decorative forms, turning a practical object into an ornament. Some clasps were simple loops and hooks. Others were designed with artistic flourishes, serving as both fasteners and jewelry. This change might seem small, but it made daily life easier, clothing more reliable, and appearance more elegant. Over time, these clasps evolved into brooches and fibulae, precursors of modern buttons and safety pins. The discovery of bronze clasps in graves shows that they were valued possessions, not mere utilitarian scraps. They reveal how technology touched even the smallest details of life, bringing both convenience and beauty to something as ordinary as fastening a cloak against the wind. Bronze weights helped measure grain and goods in markets. Trade was the lifeblood of the Bronze Age, and fairness in exchange required measurement. Bronze weights provided the solution. Small but precise, they ensured that merchants could balance grain, spices, or metal ingots with consistency. Their shapes varied, cubes, discs, or even tiny figurines, but their purpose was universal: trust. A market stall might have scales balanced with these weights, proving that a bag of grain was worth a set amount of bronze, or that an ingot was the correct size. This system of measurement represented an intellectual leap, requiring abstract thought and agreed standards. It also reveals how much people cared about fairness in trade. The presence of bronze weights shows us that the economy of the age was not random barter, but carefully measured exchange, building systems of trust that made large-scale trade possible. They were small tools with enormous importance. Bronze toys have been uncovered in children's graves. Among the most touching discoveries of the Bronze Age are toys made for children. Archaeologists have found miniature carts with bronze fittings, small animal figurines, and even rattles crafted from the alloy. These objects often appear in children's graves, placed there with care by grieving families. They remind us that even in distant antiquity, children played, imagined, and learned through toys, just as they do today. The fact that parents chose to bury such items with their children reveals both love and belief in an afterlife where the child might need them. Toys may seem frivolous, but they tell us about culture, that children were cherished, that their happiness mattered, and that play was seen as part of life. In the sparkle of a tiny bronze figurine, we glimpse the humanity of the Bronze Age, not through kings or warriors, but through the innocence of its children. Everyday life sparkled with bronze in ways we rarely imagine. We often think of bronze in terms of weapons, tools, and treasures, but it also touched the quiet corners of life. Bronze pins held clothing, mirrors caught faces in the morning light, cooking pots simmered with food, and small ornaments decorated homes. Even mundane objects carried the sheen of metal. Archaeologists have uncovered spoons, strainers, tweezers, and razors, the little tools of daily existence. To live in the Bronze Age was to be surrounded by a subtle sparkle, each glint reminding people of the power of fire and craft. These small objects are easy to overlook in the shadow of swords or statues, but they are perhaps more telling. They show that bronze was not reserved for elites alone. It was woven into the lives of ordinary families, brightening kitchens, bedrooms, and workshops. Civilization was not only built on bronze, it lived with it. Bronze helmets gave warriors their first true head protection. Before the Bronze Age, heads were vulnerable in battle. Hide caps or wooden helmets offered little defense against clubs, arrows, or blades. Bronze changed this. Metal helmets, often hammered from sheets or cast in segments, provided reliable protection for the skull and face. Some were simple domes, while others had cheek guards or crests that displayed rank. For the first time, warriors could march into combat knowing that their most vital area was shielded. This changed not only survival, but also strategy. Armies could fight longer, endure more, and push further. The psychological effect was just as important. A soldier gleaming in helmet and armor must have seemed imposing, even invincible, to enemies still unprotected. The helmet became both shield and symbol, marking the wearer as part of a warrior class. Bronze gave humanity its first real headgear of war, and with it, confidence and dominance. Shields were edged in bronze to resist blade strikes. Wooden shields had long been used for defense, but they wore down quickly under the blows of stone or metal. By edging them with bronze, craftsmen created far more durable protection. The metal bands reinforced the rim, preventing swords from splintering the wood and arrows from shattering its edge. Some shields were further decorated with bronze bosses or designs, turning them into displays of status as well as instruments of war. The sight of a wall of shields edged in gleaming bronze would have been formidable, both in defense and in display. This innovation extended the life of shields, made armies more effective, and gave warriors a psychological edge in combat. Shields became not just barriers but emblems of power, decorated with patterns that spoke of identity and pride. Bronze added strength, beauty, and longevity to the most basic tool of defense. Bronze arrowheads pierced armor more effectively than stone. Archery had existed for millennia, but the shift from stone to bronze arrowheads transformed it into a more lethal force. Stone tips could shatter on impact, and even when sharp, they often lacked the weight and durability to penetrate armor. Bronze arrowheads solved both problems. Stronger, sharper, and more uniform, they pierced leather, wood, and even early metal armor with deadly precision. Armies could now field volleys of arrows that were not merely harassing fire, but battle-deciding weapons. For hunters, too, bronze arrowheads meant greater success and efficiency. Archaeological finds reveal caches of such arrowheads, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, evidence of organized military preparation. The transition to bronze arrowheads was not just an improvement in weaponry, it was a revolution in ranged combat. Their gleam in flight symbolized both progress and peril, carrying death faster and further than stone ever could. Large armies could now be equipped with standardized bronze weapons. In earlier ages, weapons varied widely, shaped by local stone or the skill of individual craftsmen. The Bronze Age brought standardization. With organized casting and molds, entire armies could be equipped with swords, spears, and arrowheads of uniform design. This created new levels of military discipline and effectiveness. Soldiers could fight in coordinated formations, knowing their weapons were consistent in weight and balance. For rulers, this meant greater control, as armies became instruments of centralized power rather than collections of individually armed men. Standardization also fostered mass production. Workshops turned out weapons not for one warrior, but for hundreds. This marked the dawn of professionalized warfare, where armies were no longer temporary bands, but permanent forces maintained by the state. Bronze gave rulers the means to equip, organize, and dominate on a scale never before possible, reshaping the nature of war and empire. Professional warrior classes began to emerge. As bronze weapons became more widespread and armies more organized, a new social role crystallized: the professional warrior. Unlike farmers who fought only in times of need, these men trained, armed, and lived as soldiers full-time. Their weapons and armor were often provided by rulers, and their loyalty was rewarded with land, privileges, or status. This development changed societies profoundly. Military power became concentrated in the hands of specialists, creating classes of warriors who stood apart from common people. These fighters carried not only weapons, but authority, shaping politics and enforcing order. In many cultures, they became the elite, celebrated in song and story, buried with their weapons as marks of honor. The professional warrior class was born in bronze, and it would endure through centuries, setting the stage for knights, samurai, and soldiers of later ages. Their rise began with gleaming blades and hammered armor. Bronze-equipped charioteers dominated battlefields. Once bronze fittings made chariots reliable, they became the most feared weapon of the age. Swift, mobile, and powerful, chariots allowed warriors to strike with speed and retreat just as quickly. Armed with bronze-tipped spears, arrows, or javelins, charioteers could disrupt enemy lines and inspire terror among infantry. Their presence on the battlefield also symbolized prestige. Only elites could afford such vehicles, making them both weapons and status symbols. In Egypt, Hittite Anatolia, and Mesopotamia, entire armies were organized around chariot divisions. Battles became clashes not only of foot soldiers, but of elite charioteer classes, gleaming with bronze fittings, armor, and weapons. The chariot was as much a psychological weapon as a physical one, its speed and shine overwhelming to less organized foes. For centuries, dominance on the battlefield belonged to those who mastered the art of the bronze-clad chariot. The sound of bronze trumpets rallied troops. War was not only about weapons, but also about communication. Bronze trumpets, with their piercing tones, carried across the chaos of battlefields, signaling commands, rallying soldiers, or intimidating foes. Their sound was unlike anything else of the age: sharp, metallic, and resonant. To hear a trumpet blare over the clash of swords was to know the presence of order amid confusion, the voice of a commander cutting through chaos. These instruments also played roles in ceremonies, parades, and rituals, their tones marking moments of transition or celebration. Trumpets gave voice to bronze itself, turning metal into sound that shaped human action. In both war and peace, they were symbols of unity, power, and command. The trumpet's call, carried on bronze breath, was one of the defining sounds of the age, echoing across battlefields and into the collective memory of civilizations. Some swords were ceremonial, never meant for real combat. Not every sword forged in bronze was meant for war. Archaeologists have uncovered blades too delicate, ornate, or impractical to be used in battle. These ceremonial swords were objects of status, ritual, or devotion. They might be buried with rulers, dedicated in temples, or displayed as symbols of authority. Their decoration often exceeded practical need. Engraved hilts, inlaid patterns, or exaggerated shapes that made them unsuitable for fighting, but powerful as symbols. Such swords remind us that bronze was as much about meaning as function. A ceremonial blade carried messages of power, legitimacy, and divine favor. In some cases, these swords may have been offered to gods, cast into rivers, or buried in hoards. Though they never tasted combat, their role was no less significant. They fought battles of the spirit, securing authority and blessing in ways sharper than steel could ever achieve. Bronze weapons were traded as diplomatic gifts. Weapons of bronze were more than tools of war. They were symbols of prestige and trust. Rulers exchanged swords, daggers, and spearheads as diplomatic gifts, gestures of alliance or goodwill. Such weapons were often elaborately decorated, intended less for battle than for display. To present a rival king with a finely crafted bronze blade was to acknowledge respect, while also showcasing the skill of one's craftsman. These gifts traveled far, crossing cultural boundaries and sometimes ending up in lands where they had little practical use, but great symbolic value. In this way, bronze weapons became emissaries of peace as well as war, carrying messages of friendship, alliance, or deterrence. They remind us that diplomacy has always been entwined with the symbols of power, and in the Bronze Age, nothing symbolized power more clearly than a gleaming weapon forged from fire and earth. Wars were sometimes fought over access to tin. Behind the clash of swords and the fall of cities often lay a simpler truth: the struggle for resources. Tin, rare and essential for making bronze, was among the most contested of all. Regions rich in tin were magnets for conflict, as control of mines meant control of weapons, tools, and prosperity. Armies marched to seize deposits, and trade routes were guarded jealously. Some scholars believe that legendary wars, remembered in fragments of myth and epic, may have begun as struggles for tin. These wars show how deeply economies and politics depended on the alloy. Without tin, copper alone was too soft with tin. Civilizations flourished. It was the hidden treasure of the Bronze Age, the invisible force behind alliances and conflicts alike. To fight for tin was to fight for the very foundation of power, survival, and civilization in a world defined by bronze. Bronze figurines captured dances and ceremonies long forgotten. Among the most evocative artifacts of the Bronze Age are small figurines, many cast in bronze, that depict people in postures of dance, worship, or ritual. These figures, sometimes no larger than a hand, freeze moments of life that would otherwise be lost. Their raised arms, bent knees, or flowing movements suggest ceremonies, psalms, and traditions we can only imagine. Some may have been used as votive offerings placed in temples or shrines. Others may have served as teaching tools or as symbols of identity within a community. What is remarkable is their ability to communicate across millennia. Though silent and still, they speak of music, movement, and joy. The fact that ancient people chose to immortalize dances and ceremonies in bronze tells us that these acts mattered deeply, binding communities together. They are echoes of human expression, preserved in metal where voices and steps have vanished. lost wax casting allowed unprecedented artistic detail. The lost wax technique, first perfected in the Bronze Age, was one of the greatest artistic revolutions in history. It allowed craftsmen to create objects with extraordinary precision, capturing intricate patterns, flowing shapes, and lifelike details. The process began with a model sculpted from wax, which was encased in clay. When heated, the wax melted away, leaving a hollow mold. Into this space, molten bronze was poured, filling every curve and line. The result was a piece that preserved the artist's vision in enduring metal. From delicate jewelry to statues of gods, lost wax casting opened new horizons of creativity. It was not just technique, but transformation, turning fragile wax into eternal bronze. The method is still used today, more than 3,000 years later, a living legacy of the Bronze Age. Each lost wax creation is both artifact and miracle, proof of human ingenuity preserved in metal and fire. Ritual vessels in China carried elaborate inscriptions. In ancient China, bronze was not only a material of strength, but also a canvas of meaning. Ritual vessels, many shaped as tripods or bowls, bore elaborate inscriptions etched into their gleaming surfaces. These were not casual markings, but carefully cast messages, records of dedications, prayers, and sometimes even historical events. Families offered wine or food to their ancestors using these vessels, believing the spirits would bless the living in return. The inscriptions immortalized names and deeds, allowing descendants to remember their forebears. Even today, some of these characters remain legible, their voices echoing across more than 3,000 years. Each vessel was both sacred object and written archive, merging artistry with record-keeping. They reveal a world where ritual, memory, and metallurgy intertwined, reminding us that the written word was not only on clay or bamboo, but also inscribed forever into the sheen of bronze. Decorative daggers of bronze blended beauty with lethality. Daggers of the Bronze Age were rarely plain. While many were practical, designed for combat or hunting, others blended functionality with extraordinary artistry. These daggers gleamed with inlaid designs, ivory or wooden hilts wrapped in leather, and blades etched with patterns. Some were ceremonial, never meant to see battle, but their form alone radiated danger. To hold such a dagger was to grasp both beauty and power, a work of art that could also take a life. They were buried with rulers, displayed in palaces, and gifted between elites as tokens of prestige. The duality is striking. They embodied elegance and lethality in the same breath. A dagger like this was more than a tool, it was an emblem of identity, a statement of wealth, and a reminder that the line between art and weapon could be as thin as the blade itself. Masks of the alloy represented gods, ancestors, and spirits. Bronze masks uncovered from ancient sites often seem strange to modern eyes. Wide eyes, exaggerated features, faces frozen in expressions that hover between human and otherworldly. These masks were not merely decorative. They embodied gods, ancestors, or spiritual forces, giving physical form to beings otherwise unseen. In rituals, they may have been worn by priests or displayed in temples, their metallic surfaces catching the flicker of firelight. In burials, masks could transform the deceased into a timeless figure, granting them presence in the afterlife. The alloy itself, durable and gleaming, reinforced the sacred role of these objects. To confront such a mask was to stand before the threshold of the divine, staring into a face that was both familiar and alien. They reveal how the Bronze Age imagined transformation, from mortal to spirit, from seen to unseen, with metal as the medium. Animal figures cast in bronze adorned temples and homes. Bulls with curved horns, birds poised in flight, serpents coiled in eternal spirals. These were among the animals immortalized in bronze during the age. People across Europe, Asia, and the Near East cast such figures to adorn temples, shrines, and homes. Each animal carried symbolic meaning. The bull as a symbol of strength and fertility, the bird as messenger to the heavens, the snake as guardian of cycles and mystery. These figurines served as offerings to gods, protective charms for households, or tokens of community identity. Their small size made them personal, yet their symbolism was vast. Even today, when we find these animals in archaeological digs, they feel alive, as though their power has not diminished. They remind us of a time when the natural world was not separate from the sacred, and when every creature carried echoes of divinity in its form. Mirrors of bronze were engraved with intricate designs. Polished bronze mirrors offered the first clear reflections many people had ever seen, but their reverse sides carried as much beauty as their shining faces. Artisans engraved the backs of mirrors with spirals, geometric patterns, animals, or scenes of myth. These engravings transformed an everyday object into a work of art. To gaze into one was to see not just yourself, but also a frame of meaning, a story surrounding the reflection. In some cultures, mirrors carried magical associations. They were believed to reveal the soul or to ward off evil spirits. Many were buried in graves, their reflective surfaces meant to accompany the dead into the afterlife. Holding such a mirror was like holding both practicality and poetry, a polished face showing the here and now, and engraved symbols whispering of eternity. Each one captured light, identity, and imagination together in shining bronze. Musicians played bronze cymbals and horns at rituals. The Bronze Age sounded very different from the Stone Age. With the advent of metalworking, new instruments appeared, horns, cymbals, and gongs that produced sharp, resonant tones. These instruments were often played in rituals, their metallic sounds cutting through chants and drums. The crash of cymbals might mark the climax of a ceremony, while the blast of a horn could call worshippers to attention or announce the presence of the divine. Their tones carried far, echoing across open-air temples or valleys. Beyond ritual, they also appeared in warfare, signaling troops and intimidating enemies. To hear the metallic ring of a cymbal or the deep bellow of a horn must have been awe-inspiring, even frightening. These instruments reveal that bronze was not only for sight and touch, but also for sound, shaping the auditory world of the age with music both sacred and martial. Jewelry makers blended bronze with gold for striking contrasts. Bronze was already beautiful, but when artisans combined it with gold, the results were spectacular. Necklaces, rings, and bracelets often paired the two metals, the warm tones of bronze providing contrast to the brilliance of gold. The effect was more than aesthetic, it was symbolic. Bronze represented strength and craft, while gold symbolized rarity and divine favor. Together they expressed balance, harmony, and wealth. Such pieces were reserved for elites, worn in life and buried in death, statements of power that glowed with dual splendor. To wear jewelry of mixed metals was to display both resources and the skill of artisans who could blend them. These ornaments remind us that Bronze Age societies sought not just functionality but beauty, layering meaning into adornment. They stand as proof of humanity's enduring desire to merge art with identity, transforming simple metals into emblems of elegance. Artworks in bronze were often melted down and reused, erasing past creations. Unlike stone carvings, bronze was not permanent in its form. When societies needed metal, old statues, tools, or weapons were melted down and recast into new objects. This recycling made bronze endlessly practical, but also tragic for history. Countless works of art disappeared in the fires of necessity, their beauty erased to provide raw material. A temple statue might later become a cooking pot or a ceremonial mask transformed into spearheads. This practice shows how valuable bronze was. It could not be wasted. At the same time, it reminds us how fleeting culture can be, even when made from durable materials. What survives today is only a fraction of what once existed, the lucky few objects that escaped the smelting fire. Bronze was eternal in substance, but impermanent in form, always vulnerable to the cycle of destruction and rebirth. Idols of bronze represented fertility, war, and the natural world. Throughout the Bronze Age, metal idols were created to embody forces that governed human existence. Some represented fertility, with rounded human forms or symbolic animals tied to birth and harvest. Others depicted war, brandishing weapons or armored for protection. Still others were tied to the natural world, rivers, mountains, storms, or celestial bodies. These idols varied in size, from tiny amulets carried by individuals to larger statues placed in shrines. They were not simply art, but vessels of belief, channels for prayer and devotion. Their durability meant they could pass from one generation to the next, building continuity of worship. Each idol reflected a worldview where the sacred was not distant but close, embodied in metal and form. In their silence, these idols still speak of ancient hopes and fears, fertility, protection, survival, and reverence for the forces of nature. Offerings of bronze were left in rivers and lakes. Across Europe and Asia, archaeologists have found hordes of bronze objects in rivers, lakes, and bogs. These were not lost possessions, but deliberate offerings. Swords, ornaments, tools, and figurines were cast into water as gifts to unseen spirits or deities. Water was seen as a boundary between worlds, a place where the human could meet the divine. To throw a gleaming sword into a river was an act of sacrifice, surrendering wealth to the gods in hope of favor. These deposits were costly, showing how deeply people believed in the act. Even today, divers and archaeologists uncover such offerings, objects preserved by mud and water for thousands of years. They remind us that not all treasures were meant to be kept. Some were meant to vanish, given away to the currents, a quiet dialogue between humanity and the unseen. The shine of bronze was thought to carry divine power. Bronze is not only strong, it shines. Polished to brilliance, it reflects light with a warmth that must have seemed magical to ancient eyes. This quality made it a natural choice for sacred objects. A mirror, idol, or weapon of bronze did not just exist, it glowed, alive with light. People came to see this shine as a sign of divine essence. A bronze sword might symbolize lightning, while a bronze idol glowed like the sun or stars. This belief imbued ordinary objects with extraordinary meaning, turning them into vessels of spiritual energy. Even today, when archaeologists polish a corroded piece and restore its gleam, the effect feels otherworldly. It is easy to imagine how ancient peoples looked at that shine and saw more than metal. They saw fire captured, light embodied, divinity held in human hands. Some gods were imagined as wielding bronze weapons. Myths of the Bronze Age often depict gods carrying weapons made from the very metal that defined human power. A divine spear, sword, or axe of bronze was more than a tool. It was a symbol of cosmic authority. Just as kings and warriors relied on bronze weapons to rule, so too did the gods, in myth, wield their shining arms to maintain order against chaos. These stories reflected the close relationship between material culture and belief. The same blades that shaped battlefields in the human world also shaped the struggles of the heavens. To worshippers, the parallel reinforced the sacredness of bronze. Their weapons echoed the gods' weapons, their victories reflections of divine battles. Each forged blade carried not just practical power, but also mythic resonance, a piece of the divine struggle cast into human hands. Bells of bronze summoned spirits during rituals. The ringing of bronze bells was a sacred sound. In many Bronze Age cultures, these bells were struck to call upon spirits, gods, or ancestors. Their tones were believed to open pathways between worlds, carrying human prayers into the unseen. Some bells were tiny, worn as charms, while others were large enough to fill temples with their resonant sound. Their presence in graves suggests they were also guides for the dead, summoning protection in the afterlife. The act of ringing was both practical and mystical. Practical in uniting communities in ritual, mystical in bridging human and divine. The clear, bright sound of a bronze bell still carries that aura today, a reminder of voices once raised in sacred spaces. In the echo of the bell, people of the Bronze Age heard not just vibration, but connection, a fleeting bridge between earth and spirit. Figurines of bulls, birds, and snakes were cast in bronze for cults. Animals held deep meaning in the Bronze Age, often linked to cults that worshipped fertility, strength, or the cycles of life. Figurines of bulls, birds, and snakes appear again and again in excavations. The bull symbolized virility and power, its horns a reminder of raw force. Birds represented messages from the sky, their flight a link to the heavens. Snakes embodied cycles of death and rebirth, their coiled forms full of mystery. These figurines were small but powerful, tokens of devotion carried by individuals or offered in shrines. They reveal a world where animals were not separate from the sacred, but part of it, each creature carrying divine symbolism. To cast them in bronze was to immortalize their power, to make their symbolism as enduring as metal itself. Each figurine was a bridge between human and animal, mortal and divine. Temples hoarded bronze as sacred wealth. Temples of the Bronze Age were not only centers of worship, but also repositories of immense wealth. Bronze ingots, vessels, and ornaments piled up in sacred spaces, offerings from rulers, warriors, and farmers alike. To dedicate bronze to a temple was to surrender value to the gods, transforming earthly wealth into divine favor. Priests oversaw these hoards, distributing them for ritual or keeping them as reserves. The accumulation of so much bronze within temples gave religion both spiritual and economic power, reinforcing the role of priests as guardians of prosperity. For ordinary people, the glitter of stored bronze confirmed that the gods blessed the site. For archaeologists, these temple hoards reveal how deeply intertwined faith and wealth were. Bronze, gleaming in sacred chambers, was both offering and treasure, a measure of devotion and power sealed within holy walls. Masks of bronze were used in ancestor veneration. Bronze masks were not only for gods or burials, they also played roles in ancestor worship. In some cultures, masks were placed on the faces of the deceased, allowing them to be remembered in gleaming permanence. Others were displayed in homes or shrines, serving as reminders of lineage and identity. To look upon such a mask was to see the face of the past staring back, preserved in unyielding metal. These masks embodied continuity, linking generations in both ritual and memory. Their durability meant that families could honor ancestors for centuries, passing down faces across time. They tell us that the Bronze Age was not only about progress and invention, but also about remembrance. The gleam of a bronze mask was both memorial and presence, ensuring that the spirits of the dead remained part of the living community. Bronze vessels carried sacred oils and libations. Across the Bronze Age world, vessels shaped from the alloy played central roles in rituals of offering. They carried sacred oils, wine or water, poured onto altars or graves as libations to gods and ancestors. These vessels were often beautifully decorated, with handles shaped like animals or patterns that invoked divine protection. To pour from such a vessel was to perform more than a simple act. It was to bridge the human and the sacred. The durability of bronze meant that these vessels could be used for generations, each offering layering new meaning onto the old. Their presence in tombs shows their importance in death as well as life. Each vessel was a mediator, carrying not just liquid but prayers, hopes, and devotion. To hold one was to hold both craftsmanship and faith, forged together in shining metal. Items of the alloy were buried to feed the gods of the earth. Not all offerings were left in shrines or waters. Some were deliberately buried in the soil. Tools, weapons, and ornaments were placed in pits, given to the gods of the earth as gifts or nourishment. This practice reflected a belief that the earth itself was alive, a divine force that sustained crops and communities. By burying valuable bronze objects, people sought to maintain harmony with the land, ensuring fertility and protection. Such offerings were costly. To remove a tool from daily use was no small sacrifice, but they expressed deep devotion. Archaeologists who uncover these deposits find objects intentionally broken or arranged, signs of ritual rather than disposal. These buried offerings remind us that the Bronze Age was not only about building and making, but also about giving back, returning wealth to the soil that sustained human life. The Bronze Age ended in waves of dramatic collapse. For centuries, the Bronze Age had thrived, its cities interconnected by trade, its rulers commanding wealth and armies. Then, within a few generations, much of it unraveled. Palaces burned, kingdoms crumbled, and great centers of power fell silent. This collapse, around the 12th century BCE, struck across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East, leaving ruins where thriving societies had stood. The reasons remain debated. Famine, earthquakes, climate shifts, and invasions all played roles. The collapse was not a single event, but a wave of disasters that rippled across the region, breaking the networks that sustained civilization. Writing systems disappeared in some places, leaving centuries of silence. Yet this ending was also a transition. Out of the ruins of the Bronze Age, new cultures emerged, carrying fragments of memory into the Iron Age. The collapse was both catastrophe and renewal, a reminder of history's cycles. Around the eastern Mediterranean, great cities were abandoned. Archaeology paints a haunting picture of the Bronze Age collapse. Across the eastern Mediterranean, cities that had stood for centuries were suddenly deserted. In Ugarit, clay tablets were left unfinished in scribes' hands as the city burned. In Hattusa, capital of the Hittite Empire, palaces were reduced to rubble. Mycenaean strongholds in Greece fell, their storerooms emptied and halls deserted. Even powerful Egypt felt the strain, struggling against invasions and internal turmoil. These abandoned cities tell of a world unraveling. They remind us that no matter how mighty a civilization, it remains vulnerable to the pressures of nature, war, and change. The silence of these ruins, once filled with trade, music, and ritual, speaks louder than words. They stand as monuments not only to human achievement, but also to impermanence, showing how quickly even the brightest lights of an age can be extinguished. Sea peoples may have disrupted bronze trade networks. One of the enduring mysteries of the Bronze Age collapse is the role of the so-called Sea Peoples. These groups, whose exact origins remain uncertain, appeared in waves across the eastern Mediterranean in the late 13th and 12th centuries BCE. They attacked cities, toppled kingdoms, and disrupted vital sea routes. For societies dependent on long-distance trade, especially for tin, essential for making bronze, their arrival was catastrophic. Without reliable trade, the entire foundation of the Bronze Age economy wavered. Egyptian inscriptions describe fierce battles against these seaborne invaders, while archaeological layers of destruction suggest their raids left cities in ruins. Some scholars argue the Sea Peoples were not a single people but displaced migrants, perhaps fleeing famine or climate shifts. Whatever their identity, their sudden appearance coincided with the collapse of empires, leaving behind one of history's great enigmas. Marauders, refugees, or both, they reshaped the destiny of civilizations. Shortages of tin weakened entire economies. Tin was the hidden lifeblood of the Bronze Age, rarer and harder to obtain than copper. Without tin, there could be no bronze. Trade networks stretched thousands of miles to bring it from distant mines to city workshops. But as these routes faltered, whether due to wars, climate shifts, or invasions, shortages of tin spread. Civilizations built on bronze suddenly faced material scarcity. Tools wore out, weapons dulled, and farmers struggled without reliable replacements. In some regions, people resorted to recycling old bronze or substituting with pure copper, which was softer and less effective. The scarcity of tin did not just reduce production, it undermined trust in rulers and priests who had once guaranteed access to resources. A world that depended on a fragile chain of supply found itself vulnerable. The tin shortage reveals how a single rare element could destabilize entire economies and civilizations. Climate change may have contributed to famine. Archaeological and climatic evidence suggests the Bronze Age collapse was not only about war and trade, but also about nature itself. Around the 12th century BCE, records indicate periods of severe drought across the eastern Mediterranean. Crops failed, harvests shrank, and famine spread. Letters from Ugarit and other cities describe desperate appeals for grain. Tree ring studies and sediment samples reveal a prolonged climate shift that may have lasted decades. For agrarian societies already stressed by war and migration, this environmental crisis was devastating. Hungry populations were more likely to rebel or flee, adding pressure to already fragile kingdoms. Famine also disrupted the armies and workforces needed to maintain cities and palaces. In this light, the Bronze Age collapse was not just political but ecological, a reminder that human achievement depends on the rhythms of climate and that shifts in weather can alter the course of civilizations. Iron smelting eventually replaced bronze. As bronze became harder to produce, a new technology rose: iron smelting. Iron ore was far more abundant than tin, making it a more reliable resource. Early iron tools were not always superior. Without advanced smelting, iron could be brittle, but once techniques improved, iron weapons and tools surpassed bronze in hardness and availability. The transition was gradual, uneven across regions, but it reshaped human history. With iron, societies were no longer constrained by rare tin mines or long-distance trade. Tools for farming, weapons for armies, and infrastructure for cities could all be supplied from local resources. This technological leap did more than end the Bronze Age. It ushered in new social dynamics. Kingdoms rose not from control of tin, but from mastery of iron. The spread of this new metal marked one of humanity's greatest transitions, turning scarcity into abundance and altering history forever. Societies that adapted to iron survived the transition. When the world of the Bronze Age unraveled, not all societies fell. Those that embraced the new resource, iron, managed to endure and even thrive. The Hittites, for example, were among the first to experiment with iron smelting, and their techniques spread outward. Communities that learned to forge iron could continue to arm soldiers and equip farmers. ensuring both defense and food production. Meanwhile, those that clung only to bronze struggled. Their power diminished as supply lines failed. The lesson is striking. Survival was not about size or wealth, but about adaptability. In times of upheaval, those who learned new methods, embraced new resources, and innovated endured. The transition from bronze to iron reminds us that technological change is not merely progress, it is survival. Civilizations rise or fall not only by armies and kings, but by their ability to forge a stronger blade. Some regions clung to bronze long after iron spread. The adoption of iron was not uniform. In some regions, bronze retained cultural, spiritual, or practical value, even as iron weapons became dominant elsewhere. For example, bronze continued to be used for ceremonial objects, statues, and jewelry because of its golden shine and resistance to rust. In some coastal regions with established trade routes, bronze remained accessible and desirable. The prestige of bronze also mattered. To many, it was still the metal of kings and gods, even if iron was harder. This lingering use highlights the complexity of cultural change. Materials do not simply vanish when replaced by stronger alternatives, they retain meaning. But the persistence of bronze shows that societies balance utility with tradition, clinging to symbols even as the world moves forward. It was not only a material but a memory, a shining relic of an age that still held power in people's minds. Legends of fallen Bronze Age kingdoms echo in later myths. The collapse of the Bronze Age did not erase its memory. Instead, stories of fallen kingdoms lived on in legend. Tales of lost cities, heroic battles, and vanished peoples echo in Greek mythology and Near Eastern traditions. The burning of Troy, immortalized in Homer's epics, reflects real destructions of the era. Myths of floods, wandering peoples, and ruined palaces may preserve echoes of migrations and collapses that followed. These legends became part of cultural identity, shaping how later generations understood their past. While archaeology uncovers ruins, myths preserve emotions, the grief, awe, and wonder of those who lived through upheaval. The Bronze Age's end became the seedbed of epic tales, ensuring that its memory would not vanish. The myths remind us that even when civilizations fall, their stories endure, whispered through time, reshaped into poetry, and carried as cultural memory across the centuries. The memory of the Bronze Age lived on in Homer's epics. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, though written centuries after the fall of Bronze Age kingdoms, are steeped in the imagery of that vanished world. The heroes of these poems wield bronze armor and swords, fight at citadels like Troy, and live in a society reminiscent of Mycenaean Greece. Though mythologized, these details preserve faint echoes of a time before iron became dominant. Archaeological discoveries of Mycenaean palaces and artifacts align with Homer's descriptions, suggesting that oral tradition carried fragments of Bronze Age reality across generations. These epics show how memory survives in story, not as exact record, but as cultural truth. For the Greeks, the Bronze Age was already a time of heroes, larger than life, both admired and mourned. Through Homer, the age was immortalized, not as ruins in the earth, but as eternal words sung to inspire awe, sorrow, and wonder. The very word bronze may have Persian origins. The term we use today for the alloy of copper and tin may trace its roots back to Persian. Some linguists suggest that bronze derives from the Persian word birinj, meaning copper. If true, it would reflect the far-reaching influence of trade and language in the ancient world. Words, like metals, traveled along routes of exchange, reshaped by each culture that adopted them. The fact that the name itself may come from Persia is fitting. bronze was never the possession of one people, but a shared achievement of many, born of interconnectedness. This linguistic clue is a reminder that history is not only preserved in ruins or artifacts, but also in the very words we use. Each time we speak of bronze, we may be echoing a fragment of an ancient language, a whisper of the long journeys of both people and materials across continents. Bronze corrosion produces a green patina called verdigris. Over time, bronze exposed to air and moisture develops a green surface known as verdigris. To modern eyes, this patina often signals age, but in antiquity, it may have carried symbolic meaning. The color echoed nature, the green of plants, the hues of water, and could give objects an otherworldly aura. Some ancient peoples may have even prized this transformation, seeing it as the metal's way of aligning with the natural world. For archaeologists, verdigris is both a challenge and a gift. While it can damage fine details, it also protects the core of the object from further decay. The sight of green-coated bronze today is iconic, instantly connecting us with deep time. It is the color of survival, proof that metal cast thousands of years ago still endures, weathered but not gone, carrying its history in a cloak of natural transformation. Ancient forgers sometimes faked bronze by coating copper. Not all that glittered in the Bronze Age was genuine. Archaeologists have discovered objects made of copper coated with a thin layer of tin or bronze, designed to mimic the prized alloy. These forgeries suggest that even in antiquity, artisans knew how to exploit appearances. To the casual eye, the object shone with the same golden hue, but in strength, it fell short. Such tricks reveal that deception has always walked hand in hand with value. They also remind us of the intense demand for bronze, so strong that fakes could circulate alongside the real thing. For archaeologists, spotting these forgeries is a puzzle, requiring careful analysis of layers and composition. In their own way, the forgeries are fascinating artifacts, not only for what they pretended to be, but for what they reveal, that even in the ancient world, supply, demand, and deceit intertwined. Tools of bronze were recycled endlessly, making intact finds rare. Unlike stone or ceramic, bronze was far too valuable to leave unused. When a tool wore out, it was melted down and cast anew. This endless cycle of reuse means that archaeologists rarely find complete tools from the Bronze Age. What survives are often fragments, hoards hidden away, or items buried as offerings. Each intact artifact is therefore precious, a survivor of countless furnaces. This recycling reflects both practicality and scarcity. Metal was expensive to produce, and no community could afford waste. Yet this very efficiency robbed history of many masterpieces. We must imagine countless plows, knives, and chisels that lived, worked, and vanished back into molten form. The rarity of surviving tools is itself a testament to how thoroughly Bronze Age societies valued their metal, never letting it lie idle when it could be reborn into something useful again. The weight of bronze oxhide ingots standardized Mediterranean trade. Among the most remarkable artifacts of the Bronze Age are oxhide ingots, large slabs of bronze shaped like stretched animal hides. These ingots, often weighing around 30 kilograms, were produced for ease of transport and trade. Their standardized weight made them reliable units of exchange, essentially functioning as a form of currency. Ships carried them across the Mediterranean, where they were traded, stored, or melted down into tools and weapons. The Uluburun shipwreck famously contained hundreds of such ingots, a treasure trove of ancient commerce. Their distinctive shape, with 4 protruding legs, made them easy to carry on the shoulders of porters. Oxhide ingots demonstrate the sophistication of Bronze Age economies, where long-distance trade required consistency and trust. They were more than lumps of metal. They were symbols of connectivity, binding together distant cultures in a web of shared material wealth. Bronze technology allowed the earliest large-scale water pipes. The rise of metallurgy opened new possibilities for infrastructure, including the management of water. Archaeological evidence shows that some of the earliest large-scale water pipes were made of bronze. Unlike clay pipes, which could crack, or wooden ones, which decayed, bronze pipes were durable and could withstand pressure. They were used in palaces and cities to bring water to fountains, baths, or irrigation systems. This was more than convenience. It represented a leap in urban planning, improving hygiene, agriculture, and public life. The fact that rulers invested precious bronze in plumbing reveals the importance of water management for power and prestige. To command water was to command life itself. These pipes, hidden underground yet essential, show how the Bronze Age was not only about weapons and art, but also about the unseen systems that sustained growing populations and complex societies. Scales of the alloy were used to weigh precious spices. Trade in the Bronze Age was not limited to metals themselves. Spices, perfumes, and other luxuries moved along the same routes, enriching economies and cultures. To measure such delicate goods required precision, and scales crafted of bronze provided just that. These balances, with small weights carefully calibrated, allowed merchants to ensure fair exchange. Spices like cinnamon or frankincense were rare and valuable, sometimes worth as much as metals. The use of bronze scales reflects both the sophistication of trade and the integration of diverse commodities into ancient markets. Holding such a scale, a merchant could weigh not only goods but also trust, ensuring transactions across language and cultural divides. These humble tools of commerce remind us that the Bronze Age was as much about exchange of ideas, flavors, and luxuries as it was about swords and spears. Bronze gongs traveled along the Silk Road. Although we often think of the Silk Road as a product of later history, its roots stretch deep into the Bronze Age. Among the goods that traveled these routes were gongs and other instruments made of bronze. Their deep, resonant tones fascinated distant cultures, and their portability made them ideal trade items. A gong cast in one region could end up ringing in a temple thousands of miles away. These instruments became both musical tools and cultural ambassadors, carrying the sound of one society into another. The spread of gongs illustrates how technology and art transcended borders, long before the term Silk Road was coined. Each clang of bronze across a far-off land was a reminder of human connection. The echo of trade and tradition carried in sound as well as in material form. The gong's voice was not only music, but also history in vibration. The gleam of bronze connected earth, fire, and the heavens in symbolism. The process of making bronze was itself a kind of ritual. Humans drew copper from the earth, added tin brought by trade, and smelted the two together in fire. The result gleamed like sunlight, linking earth, fire, and sky. Many cultures imbued this transformation with symbolic power. The alloy was not merely material, but cosmological, a fusion of elements that reflected the order of the universe. A sword might embody lightning, a mirror the sun, a vessel the fertility of the earth. In this way, bronze objects became microcosms of the cosmos, their glow a reminder of the forces that shaped life. The gleam of bronze was more than beauty, it was meaning, a visual metaphor for balance and harmony. Each cast object carried not only utility, but also philosophy, a shining bridge between humanity and the larger order of the world. Without bronze, the rise of complex civilizations might never have happened. The Bronze Age marked one of the great turning points in human history. Stronger tools meant more efficient farming, which in turn meant surpluses to support cities. Better weapons allowed rulers to project power, defend territory, and expand influence. Trade in metals fostered connections between distant lands, spreading ideas as well as goods. In short, bronze was the foundation on which civilization grew. Without it, the leap from scattered villages to great kingdoms might have taken far longer. Bronze enabled monumental architecture, intricate artistry, and organized armies, the hallmarks of civilization. Its impact was so profound that historians define entire centuries by its use. To imagine a world without bronze is to imagine a world where progress was delayed, where history itself unfolded differently. The alloy was more than a tool. It was a catalyst, forging the path toward everything that followed. Some of the world's oldest written records mention bronze as tribute paid to kings. Cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia and inscriptions from Egypt record the delivery of bronze as tribute or tax. Kings demanded it from subjects, vassals, and allies, not just as material, but as a symbol of loyalty and submission. To pay in bronze was to acknowledge power, to send wealth that could be melted into weapons, tools, or sacred vessels. These records show how central bronze was to political order. It was not simply a commodity, but a currency of allegiance. The presence of bronze in these earliest texts underlines its importance. Before coins, before paper money, there was metal sent in ingots or finished goods, gleaming proof of wealth and obedience. Reading these ancient records today, we see not only trade, but also the politics of metallurgy, a world where kings measured their authority in the weight of bronze delivered to their treasuries. The sound of bronze being cast in ancient foundries was described as a voice of the gods. The act of casting bronze was loud, fiery, and awe-inspiring. Molten metal hissed and roared as it poured into molds, filling the air with heat and sound. Ancient accounts suggest that people described these noises as divine voices, as if the gods themselves spoke through the metal. Foundries were more than workshops. They were places of transformation, where human skill and natural forces combined to create something new. To witness bronze being born must have felt like standing at the edge of creation. The glow of furnaces, the ringing of hammers, and the hiss of cooling metal formed a symphony of fire and sound. In those moments, artisans were not only smiths, but also priests of transformation, channeling the elements. The belief that the sound was the voice of gods reflects how deeply spiritual the act of metallurgy was in the Bronze Age imagination. And so, our journey through the Bronze Age comes to a gentle close. We've wandered among forgotten citadels and shimmering treasures, stood beside foundries where fire and metal were joined, and listened to echoes of gods, ancestors, and heroes. We've seen how this alloy of copper and tin became far more than a material. It was a catalyst for kingdoms, a spark for artistry, a voice for ritual, and a thread that bound distant lands together. But like all ages, it passed. The flames of bronze dimmed, and iron rose in its place. Cities crumbled, myths grew, and what remained were fragments, masks, mirrors, vessels, and weapons, whispering of lives once lived. And yet, the memory of the Bronze Age lingers, not only in the earth, but in us. Every tool we hold, every structure we build, carries the legacy of those first great metallurgists who shaped the world with fire. Thank you for joining me on this quiet voyage through time. If you enjoyed this gentle journey, I invite you to like and subscribe or share a thought in the comments below. It helps others find their way here, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, it's time to let go. Allow the glow of the Bronze Age to fade into dreams and drift softly into rest. The past will be waiting for you when you wake. Good night.